Hello and well met. This is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we're going to go over chases, and I'm going to actually show some different methods and ways that you can simulate that. We are using the DnD5e rule set, so that may change or vary depending on what rule set you're using. I know that some rule sets have already mechanics for it. I don't think D&D has a very good mechanic for it. I think it's okay. But I know there's rule sets such as Savage Worlds that actually has chases and that sort of thing. But one thing that is available in Fantasy Grounds, I think in most core rule sets, is the actual chase tables and such. So if you were looking to create a chase or something, you have some content there to work with so that you're not constantly digging around for information. But this does assume that you have access to at least the Dungeon Master's Guide and possibly Tasha's, because there's also templates in there. And to top it off, there are some assets in the Fantasy Grounds art pack which have chase graphics in there, which may lend itself to creating chases. Another thing that I've done is I've taken some information from ChatGPT and I've created some content for chases in particular. So some of the things that I wanted to get into was, setting up the content for that, and also some ideas on how you may want to theme or to set up these things. So I have a consolidated list here of things that I had worked on previously the night before. So this is going to basically kind of go over some kind of chase. Basically, they're dynamic and thrilling encounters that can happen occasionally in your games. I think if you plan them out a little better and you kind of have an idea of what's happening with it, it'll make it more interesting. And you can kind of have this in the wings so that if it does happen, you have the contingency for it. I think sometimes when you get into these situations, you're not totally prepared for them. So there are some tools out there and some mechanics and such, but basically the mechanics will kind of make a framework for you and for your characters so that the characters and the pursuers can engage in like a fast-paced pursuit. Incorporate environmental challenges, strategic decision making, and also luck of the die when you roll for initiative. So this is kind of like the consolidation of it. So this kind of comes from some research, some stuff I've looked at online, also looking at some of my own stuff in Fantasy Grounds. So that's where a lot of this information comes from. So it's not just ChatGPT. So this is going to kind of go into the setup so you can determine the starting distance. Normally it's about 30 feet or more. How many rounds? So it's typically broken into rounds like combat rounds, but they're not exactly combat rounds. I like the 2 or the 3D4, so that's 3 rounds minimum, but 12 maximum. That's roughly about as many as I'd like. You can do like 20 or 50, but then it gets to be too monotonous. So when you roll that, if you want it to be random, the amount of rounds it takes place in, you could do that. So for turns, each participant takes turns in order of initiative. So you'd have everyone roll initiative and do that. So some movements and actions. So you can use the dash action, and each use after the first one, it requires a Constitution saving throw. So 10 plus the number of dashes. So on a failed save, the character will gain 1 level of exhaustion. So that's something that may take a little bit to incorporate and kind of keep track of. But I like that mechanic because it makes it so they can't abuse the dash action, so they can't run the whole time. And I like the idea that the players have a chance to kind of muscle through it. So on the second round, it'd be DC +1 or whatever, because it says the number of chases. So I think they mean like the number of times that you dash. So it says number of dashes. So the first one would be a DC +1, so you'd have to roll over at 11 on your con. Also, there could be obstacles, so they may require ability checks to avoid slowing down or stopping. So you might have an athletics check or maybe an acrobatics check, just depending on the flavor and how you want to run the game and how your players want to describe their actions. When players take the time to actually tell you what they're doing and kind of describe it instead of saying, I just want to make a ability check, or I just want to make an acrobatics check. I kind of don't like that. And if I need to, I would just ask them, please describe it. I mean, I want to know what it looks like. I don't just want to roll a dice to see if you make it or not. The next thing is catching up. So a pursuer has to move into the same space as the pursued to catch them. So typically requiring a successful grapple check at that point. And there could be advantage or disadvantage depending on what's going on. When you end the chase, there's a few different things. So you have an escape. So they break the line of sight and they basically are hiding, or they successfully get out of the area. Or capture. The person captures them, successfully grapples the pursued. They might even have a net. Exhaustion. So a chase might end when the characters or the pursuers become too exhausted. So that could be another thing. So I kind of like that. And then I made this rollable list here of just a themed wilderness chase event. So this has got 12 results, or you can do 3d4. This one says 1d12, but I like the 3d4. That way the minimum you can roll is 3, but the maximum is still 12. So this is just some examples. Like, for instance, the first result, a sudden snowstorm reduces visibility. It makes a d12. You have to make a d12 Constitution saving throw to avoid exhaustion, because it's hard to move through that. And this was kind of centered around escaping the prison in the north, and there was already kind of a prison break type adventure that Wizards of the Coast put out, but I kind of wanted to do my own thing. But I did theme it off of Revel's End in the Forgotten Realms for 10 towns, up in there in the Ream of the Frost Maiden. But I kind of wanted just to have a setting to put it in, but you can put it in any world or any type of area. But the theme is for wilderness, and in this case it's a snowy wilderness, so that's why some of these talk about snow and ice. So the second one is the ground beneath you gives away to a crevasse, so you have to make a DC 13 saving throw to avoid falling. So these are potential complications that you would roll. So what you could do is set up another table that says complication or not. So you could add another table, connect it with this one, and then what will happen is when you roll on the table after you do your turn and your movements, you can declare, how fast you're going to move, you're going to dash or whatever, and then you roll on this table and it would say yes or no for a complication, and if there is a complication, then you roll on this D12, and it gives you a basic kind of an idea of what may have happened. So another one is maybe your path ahead is blocked by fallen trees. So you have to make a DC 12 athletics check to clear the way, or a strength check if you don't have athletics or whatever. Just remember that anything you're skilled in, you're going to get your bonus from your proficiency bonus. But if you have a decent score, like let's say a strength bonus, that'll also help with that roll. And the last one says a large hawk circles overhead scouting for prey. Make a DC 12 stealth check to avoid detection. I don't know if I necessarily like that one, but it is kind of cool that there's something flying overhead and bothering you. I might change that to something a little bit more scary, like maybe a young dragon or something. I don't think a hawk would be as threatening when you're in the middle of a panic. But essentially I made stat blocks for the pursuers, so I have kind of a backstory. I don't want to go too deep into it, but essentially there's Lieutenant Harvick is in charge of rounding up escaped prisoners. In this case, it's Namita and Groglor the Grotesque. They were both locked up together for different reasons. They're both accused of murder, circumstantial murder. But nonetheless, they broke out together, and Lieutenant Harvick has been sent to chase them. So I kind of have a sense of who the pursuers are, the setting, that sort of thing. So it kind of helps when you plan this stuff out. So here's all their stat blocks. So this is just a kind of like a tough guard, essentially, and he's got some tactical. So he has a tactical leader. He has a way to basically assign or shout. And that's all this guy does, technically, is he just yells at everyone all the time. That's basically, he's frustrated and he's annoying, and all he does is yell at everyone. It's so crazy. But he has multi-attack with a longsword, and he also has a light crossbow. So he's pretty tough. He's not super tough, but he's got some bulk to him. And then their Stalin the Scout is someone that they had hired in one of 10 towns, probably Bryn Shander or one of the other big cities. But nonetheless, Stalin is a half-elf ranger who basically knows the wilderness. They hired him because he's a tracker and a bounty hunter. Essentially, he just gets paid to do this kind of stuff, and he's also a guide, a scout. But he goes along with them, and they throw him a pretty good. I think that said 75 gold if if he takes the job. Another 25 each for each person captured, dead or alive, and if they're captured, it's 50 each. So that's the bounty. So he's kind of with him, I think begrudgingly. I don't think he likes Harvick too much. He doesn't. He's kind of quiet, and he doesn't like that Harvick makes a bunch of noise and he's always yelling. And then he has two subordinates, Relin and Yorn. They're basically just kind of lower level guards. They have spears and they have a light crossbow, and they essentially are along for the ride. They are actually on a punishment detail. I don't really know what they did. Maybe they got caught gambling or sleeping on the job or whatever. But whoever the superior is for this particular group, with basically Harvick's boss, probably put them on this job because they knew that Harvick would ride them really hard. So they're on this journey. One guy's kind of rebellious, and the other guy is kind of a pushover. So they have personalities, and they do occasionally argue, and they fight with, or at least Relin fights with Harvick, argues essentially. But they do, listen. But when they make a mistake or something's not going right, Harvick yells at them. So that kind of sucks. And then they have two dogs, Fang and Shadow. So they're kind of like these hybrid hounds that are kind of like a husky and a tracking dog, and they're essentially there to help them sniff out and track down the fugitives. So there's two guards, two dogs, a scout, and then the lieutenant who's in charge. So that's kind of how I set this up. So when there is a chase, or maybe it happens randomly at some point in the game, maybe you have a dead moment in between towns, or whatever. This could possibly become a thing where you can throw this into your game. So you wouldn't necessarily use it, every time, but it definitely would be fun. And I think that the kind of mechanics that you need for this should be kind of planned out. Like you don't need every little single detail, but it's nice to know the environment, who's being chased, who the pursuers are, have all that stuff ready to go. So the mechanics will you can adapt these to your adventure for your players and for your session, but to incorporate these could add some fun to the game. It's kind of monotonous when you have like a slugfest, you're just going back and forth with fighting, or you're just role playing the whole time. I think this kind of adds exploration more than anything, and then it adds a little bit of tension, and it adds some role-playing opportunities, like stuff you wouldn't normally do, like yelling at each other and that kind of stuff, or doing tactical advice while you're running. I think it would be fun. So it could be, anyways. If you don't make it too long or too crazy, I think 12 rounds or less is a decent amount. And depending on what you roll and if you have any complications or not would probably depend on how fast things are going to go, what kind of setbacks you have. If you get caught or exhausted, those sort of things will all kind of play into it. But that's, kind of my own interpretation. I use some research, I use ChatGPT, and I use some rules that are already out there, and kind of built this together. And I also built some hazards. So I made stat blocks for things like when you fall in a creek, or there's a place where they have to cross this ravine, and it's this like ice bridge that is essentially really dangerous, and it can really cause havoc if they try to cross it without the right gear, or if they try to go too fast. They can also fall in the river and get hypothermia. So just all kinds of cool stuff that you can throw into these to make them more stressful and more eventful. So that's that. If you have the DnD5e rule set, that's what I'm showing right now. And if you have that rule set, if you load the Dungeon Master's Guide, there are some tables in there for wilderness exploration. And if you're familiar with Fantasy Grounds, or maybe you're new to it, there is a section, if you go to the story entries over here on the right, and then you actually click on templates. There are templates for different types of content generation for Fantasy Grounds. So you have background stories, you have magic items, artifact properties. So these come from Tasha's and our Xanathar's guide, and there's other stuff that comes out of here from other books that gives you more templates. So here's an urban chase planner. So this is kind of what I was talking about in regards to the different ways that you can handle this. So this is assuming that you have 8 participants. Okay, so that could be any number of pursuers and or people getting chased. So this is set up for 8, but you can definitely modify this template and make your own. But what it does is it rolls on the urban chase complications table, and it kind of gives you a round by round set of complications for each participant. So instead of having it happen to both players or all the pursuers, each individual pursuer and pursuants are basically going to have their own complications. I kind of don't like to have it every round, but if there's a spot in there where it says no complications, then I'm good with that. So there has to be some breathing room in there. I would think that I would weigh the table. So if I had a table that rolled for complications, and let's say it was a D20, maybe 1 through 5, there'd be no complications or something like that. And then the rest of them would be normal. So let's take a look at that table. And we want to look at the, let's see, what is this? Adventure environments. Let's just do a search for it. So let's do chase, because I know that'll probably bring up the rest of it. Okay, so there's wilderness chase and there's an urban one. So this one kind of goes over a city, and then the wilderness one is kind of similar to what I was doing. And what they have here is a series of events. It looks like they use a D20 as well. And yeah, they did exactly that. So 50% of the time, 11 through 20, no complications. So when you go to roll on that table, it's going to lay out the action ahead of time. And, of course, you can change it. You don't have to stick to it. But I think that this is a fun way to do this. So we'll do this. Urban one. We'll do a city one to see how that turns out. So when you click generate, it's going to roll hundreds of times on all these different tables, but it's going to give you a breakdown of what happens. So if I click generate, it's going to go through this, and it's going to keep track of each participant and each person, what happens to them along the way. So participants include the pursuers and the pursuant. So that's kind of what this is. You can update this, you can add or take away how many people are in there. You can kind of make a copy of this and modify it if you have to. But this is just the complication. So like participant 1 gets this. Remember, this is in the city now. So after you restart after 5 rounds if needed, is how they do this one. So every 5 rounds you roll on this. And essentially what happens is there are all these different things happen, and each pursuant has to roll, or in some cases they don't have to do anything. There's no complication. So I think this would make it tougher or a little bit more work to run, because there's a lot of different roles and you're keeping track of this. So the one way to do that in Fantasy Grounds is to kind of set up a sketch or a map or even a cell with all the different lines in it, or you can use like a grid and just use that to move your token so that you can keep track of where you are in relation to each other. And then you'd have to go down this list and read this off each round to tell each person, and including your NPCs, what they have to do. Some don't have to do anything, right? Because there's some don't have any complications. So it just depends on what's rolled here. So that's another way you can do this. And I wanted to point out that there are some assets that are chases. If you have the Fantasy Grounds art subscription, within the last month or so, they released a pack that's kind of animated. It moves. So we'll do a chase. I'm going to look for chases just to see what they have. I haven't looked at them in a while. So this is the chase. So there's some animated ground chase, fantasy grounds chase map brushes. Then there's the decorations, and then these are probably the examples. So let me look at the brushes. Yeah, so this is the ground chasing type scene. So if we were going to do like a snow one, let's see what this one's a road. Let's look at this one. Yeah, that's also. But if you wanted some kind of environment that matches kind of what you're doing, let's see if what the other folder has in it. Okay, so this has cars, wagons, vehicles. That makes sense. So this is just kind of like a ground chase. Let's see, what's this? Okay, we'll just use that for example. So I'm going to bring this up as a map record. And what you have here is this chase scene where you can use this as a way to kind of structure your chases and kind of get an idea of where you're at. So just remember, this is actually nothing's moving. This video kind of gives you the illusion that it's moving. So if you put on the grid and you're going to turn this on, let's say, and use this for your chases, and I'd probably change the color so I can see that a little bit better, and then turn it down. There we go. So I'd place my tokens on here, and then as the rounds progress, we would move the tokens from top to bottom, or however you want to do it. If you don't like it going, vertically, you can always flip that map around. So if I go to the basically go to the layers tool and select this layer, I can flip this, to a different direction. So if you don't like, how the way it's going, you can flip that around. You don't have to stay. And you can also connect them. So you can do a couple of them. So if you wanted to do another layer, you could. I don't know if it would look right though, as far as scaling goes. Let me see if I can duplicate that. So yeah, I don't know if I guess he kind of made it to where you can join it up. So if you needed it a little bit longer, I think, you can stretch that out. And then I'm going to right click and go to zoom to fit just so it kind of fits in the pocket there. And there we go. So that would be like your chase scene. And then you'd set up your tokens on there and move them about, probably going from right to left in this case. So that would be a way to kind of track the positioning of where your players are. And then you could use like this urban chase planner to essentially do the dirty work for you, basically set up everything. Well, you could do something like this. This is locked, so I'm going to unlock it, and I'll go to Control A and Control Copy, and then I'll go into ChatGPT and see what this might come up with for that. So I'm going to say something like, here is an example of an urban chase setup for the Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop. Please retheme for, let's say, a desert. And then also I'm going to say also create the rollable complications list with a 1d20 11 through 20, no complications. So here is an example of an urban chase setup for the Fantasy Grounds. Please retheme. So I think that's not a word, for a desert. Glad I didn't say dessert. Also create a rollable complications list with a 1d20 with no complications. Okay, we'll see what it does. So what we'll do is I will take, oops, I forgot to paste that in. Let's do this. So while it's thinking, I mean, that's a way you can kind of quickly break one out and then also have the table to go with it, because you may want to create this really quickly and not have to spend all day on it. So this would help with that. So obviously it's building the structure for the call out, and all these different these brackets here call on the table. And then here's the list. So the list is going to give you the roles that you'll need. So when you roll this, when you make your own template, it'll pull on this table here. So this one, just for an example, it says the sandstorm makes visibility difficult. You have to make a DC 12 or become exhausted. The ground beneath you gives way to a sudden sinkhole. So this is just kind of gives you an idea of how quickly and how rapidly you could do this. And then you can actually import this table pretty quickly. I'm asking it to reformat that table and not calling it a table. It's going to be plain text rollable list. If I say table, this is what it's going to do. Anytime you say table, for some reason it goes with it. It'll build this table for you, which is fine if you're building like a PDF or something. But if you're doing it in Fantasy Grounds, you kind of need it set up in such a way that it's not going to be difficult for you to copy and paste it into Fantasy Grounds. So I didn't necessarily want this, but that's okay. But you got to be specific, and sometimes you don't give it the right information, it gives you garbage. So you're gonna have to be careful. So this is what I was looking for. So this would be pretty quick. Like if once you have the structure, you could take something like this. You can copy and paste this into Fantasy Grounds. So I'm going to copy that group there of text. And then I'm going to go into Fantasy Grounds. And let's see. I'm going to make, first of all, I'm going to make my own template. So I think what I'll do is make my own group. So if I click on this for group 1 and rename it, so I'll say custom chase planner, like that. And that way I have my own group in case I want to export this. So you can make just a whole bunch of different chases and different tables. And then what I'll do is I'll create a blank template. And then this one will be for a desert chase, is what this will be called. And then what we'll do is, I'll close this for now. And what we'll do is we'll take the table, bring that up. Again, I'm going to make another group. This is, once you do this once, you don't have to keep doing it necessarily, but I want to go ahead and make another group. So we're going to call this, we're going to call this chase tables. Or chase complications is what it should be. Okay, so that's the group. And now I'm going to make a new table. So import text. So this is going to be delimited because I'm going to use that pipe separator. And I'm going to hit Control Victor, as in Control V. This thing here, this. Okay, so this thing here is the header. And on the left here of that pipe symbol, all that's a column. So I want to say column headers in first row. Yep. Table ranges in first column. Yes. The separator is going to be the pipe. So that's the line. And then up here, I'll put the table name. And then you can also right click and kind of see what, you can check your clipboard here. But in this case, I'm going to copy and paste the title back in there, which I removed. So that one was called what? Oh, Desert Chase Complications. So that's what we'll call that. It has to match this name up here. So if you're going to make a table and call it out, it has to have that exact name. So desert chase complications, going to hit import. That will take care of that. And now for this template, I'm going to take that other text and put it in here. So traditionally, this would have taken me a long time to make. And use a spreadsheet, make a CSV table and import it and stuff, but it's still a lot of work. Doing it like this is going to probably take you way less time. So do something like this, but I don't necessarily want the asterisk. So I want to say, yeah, I don't want those asterisks because that can throw off Fantasy Grounds. So I'm just going to have it rebuild that group of text because that's when you have stuff like that with extraneous punctuation and different things like that, that's going to be problematic. And this would also be a good time to take a, like if you wanted to change the number of pursuers, the number of rounds, you can do that too. So I'm just going to take that information. Do a little bit of formatting. All I'm doing is adding a little bit of formatting for separation and just so it looks nice when you get the output. So there's the 5 rounds. Here's the table. So if I did this right, it's going to roll for each participant on this table for 5 rounds for each participant. So let's see what happens. Yep, there we go. So it rolled, and this is what I came out with. So that's a pretty quick way to do it if you're going to use generative AI. I mean, you can use a spreadsheet and kind of pre-fill it out so that you already have some of the template in there, but you're still going to have to type in all the variations. And you might not like some of the output that ChatGPT puts out, but I kind of like, so far, I like what I see. I don't see anything that's too crazy. Like once in a while, it'll suggest something that would be very difficult to run, but in most cases, this stuff would work pretty well. So someone on round 2, participant 5, finds a scorpion nest and has to make a 14 animal handling check to avoid being stung. I don't know how you'd have time for that, but I could see maybe they just know to walk around it or something, or throw something down to distract him. I don't know. But it sounds to me more like they'd have to jump over it or something. But it depends on the size of the scorpions, I guess. I guess if they're pretty large size, like the size of a dog or larger, that may be a thing. But anyway, so this is just kind of what I wanted to go over today is that you can make chases for your rule set. And if you have like one of the core rule sets, I'm pretty sure that the story templates is available in most rule sets in Fantasy Grounds. You just have to learn how to utilize it and learn the syntax and use cases and also practice with it. So this is kind of a more of a simple thing, but they have other story templates in here. Like for instance, if you go in here, there's a story entry for like a random dungeon. So you can make, or random NPCs. So you can make this, give GPT the parameters and then tell it to build tables based off of these parameters and then import them into Fantasy Grounds. And then of course you can, it'll be quicker. That's all I'm trying to say. Not necessarily better, but quicker. So this is a way that you could do that. So you'd have a flaw or secret, a bond, ideal, some useful knowledge. These would be your table types, essentially, these brackets. and you would ask it first to build all the tables for that, and then to build your template to roll on, and then plug it into Fantasy Grounds and test it out, and voila, you'll have some pretty neat random generation tables. This wasn't available just about a year ago. I mean, you were pretty much typing all this stuff out by hand or copying and pasting out of a module or some kind of book. But now with a generative AI tool, you can definitely speed that process up quite a bit, and I don't think it's going to offend anyone. It's not like you're making art or anything. So I think this is a good use case for this, and it kind of makes this quicker, and it harnesses the power of AI and the power of Fantasy Grounds and even your imagination. Like, you can change things up. You don't have to let ChatGPT do everything. You can say, hey, look, I want this specifically, so it is partially your input, it's partially AI, and then it's partially just looking at the browsing the internet and looking for examples. So that's basically what it's doing, is pulling in that information, compiling it, making it faster for you, and makes it more convenient if you're going to build content in something like Fantasy Grounds, because I know it takes a long time. So there's some things in virtual tabletops, when you start getting into building content, it can take a long time. So this might help speed some of that process up. But anyway, so that's chases. That's one way to handle it, or a couple different ways. And you saw the chase map. For me, I would just use a static map. I wouldn't necessarily have the moving one, but that is a really cool illusion in that regard. But anyways, anyhow, guys, have a good weekend. Happy Friday, and I'll see you guys around next time. Bye-bye.